In this episode, take a journey with me as we compare what happened to little Albert in a science lab project and how Jehovah's Witnesses are conditioned to fear the Watchtower and develop many phobias. If you can understand the classical conditioning that little Albert faced in his life, then perhaps it can help you decondition yourself from the classical conditioning imposed by the Watchtower. Along the way, you'll hear brief thoughts from others in the ex-Jehovah's Witness community about how they were conditioned by the Watchtower leadership and how it has impacted their lives. Hey, this is Lady C. Have you ever heard of the little Albert experiment? I had the opportunity in my first college class to learn about this experiment, and it was interesting. The little Albert experiment, conducted in 1920 by John B. Watson and Rosalie Rayner at Johns Hopkins University, was a pivotal study in psychology that demonstrated how fears could be conditioned in humans. Watson, the father of behaviorism, sought to prove that emotions like fear were not innate, but learned through association, building on Ivan Pavlov's work with classical conditioning. In the experiment, a 9-month-old infant known as Albert initially showed no fear of a white rat. However, Watson paired the rat with a loud, startling noise, which naturally frightened Albert. After repeated pairings, Albert began to fear the rat even without the noise. This process, known as classical conditioning, showed that neutral objects could become triggers for fear through association. The study also revealed generalization. Albert's fear extended to similar objects like a rabbit, a fur coat, and a Santa Claus mask. While groundbreaking, the experiment faced ethical criticism. Albert's fear was never reversed, and it's believed he may have suffered lasting emotional effects. Modern research ethics, emphasizing informed consent and participant welfare, would not permit such an experiment today. Despite its flaws, the little Albert study laid the foundation for behaviorism and remains a key example of how fears are learned, a principle that continues to inform therapies for phobias and trauma. So I was like, wow, this is crazy. And like I said, today, that type of an experiment would be considered unethical because when we kept studying about this in the class, we learned that the mother eventually took her child away from this experiment, and they never had any other contact with little Albert. So we don't know if he was unconditioned from that conditioning that he received with that little rat, which is really, really sad. But I was thinking to myself, wow, this happens in the Kingdom Hall every day. And where this little baby was developed a phobia because of this white furry animal, we were given a lot of stimulants. They were stimulating our minds with all kind of things. And so a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses are very phobic because of the way the religion has conditioned us. That's called conditioning.
I was born and raised as a Jehovah's Witness. I'm a third generation. And so when you're born in, you're programmed, conditioned from birth, and you don't know any better. It's completely inundated everywhere around you. My family members on both sides, even depth, with aunts and uncles and everyone else, cousins and nephews, are Jehovah's Witnesses. So your role models are also obviously Jehovah's Witnesses. Your grandfather was an elder, pioneer. So you try to reach out for those things. So I was 100% in.
You're taking something and you're pairing it with something else, and you're making it have more meaning than it deserves, And that's what the Watchtower has done with themselves and the Bible or God and Jesus. They have put themselves on this pedestal, and then they have kind of conditioned all of these different things to make you feel like if you leave them, you left God and all that kind of stuff. And the phobias that are created, through the Watchtower, and it is meticulously done through their magazines. And I mean, they literally enforce obedience through the fear of punishment. When you're thinking about the disfellowshipping process and shunning, now, even though they've made these changes, in the organization, it still affects people. Just because you kind of like check a box and say, okay, you can now talk to your family and invite them to the meetings, does not mean that people are not fearful of this process, because they know what it means. They know what they've been through, as well as a lot of other people that have left that don't even know these changes have, taken place. People are still afraid. They're still really afraid of being labeled as being spiritually weak or dead. And I mean, it really ensured the obedience of the members and the relationships that they didn't want to lose with their family or their community,
When I got this fellowship, and there's a whole story behind that, and we can get into it later on, but regardless of that, when I got this fellowship, I was still living at home. I was an adult. I was 19, 20. But my mother asked me to leave. And at that point, I didn't have, I was working for some other Jehovah's Witnesses, cleaning restaurants. Didn't have a good job because I didn't go to college. Everybody else that was in my peer group that I went to school with, they were off at school, going for college. I'm still like cleaning up floors and washing windows at 19, 20 years old with no background, no education, and no future for a job. And now all of a sudden I get this fellowship and I'm already working for Witnesses. So now I have nothing. And then my mother asked me to leave the house. And that would really surprise me because I knew what the policy was. And I thought, okay, this is going to be hell living in here, being disfellowship. But, I guess I'll be going to the meetings or whatever. And we ain't going to be sitting. I'm going to be sitting in the back and she's going to be sitting in the front. And that's just the way this is going to be. I hate this, but, I had no idea. My mother came home and said, you got to leave. You got to leave the house.
As a child, one of my aunts was disfellowshipped when I was only 6 years old. And I was told she was cut out of the family. Basically, I couldn't talk to her. I wasn't allowed to. And so the only times I saw her in my whole life were at my grandfather's funeral and at my grandmother's funeral. I finally did reconnect with her. It was not easy. I didn't have any way to contact her. I had heard that she had a restaurant in a little town. And fortunately, that restaurant had her name in the title. And so via Google Maps, my brother and I were able to find her restaurant, and I had to write a letter to her restaurant. And I said, I've left. I don't believe this is right, the way the family has treated you. I'm not an active Jehovah's Witness anymore, and I'd like to get in touch with you. And she was absolutely wonderful.
And what about Armageddon? I mean, constantly through the magazines and talks at the Kingdom Hall and conventions, telling people about, dying at Armageddon.
My father just died about 6 months ago, and he had a horrible deathbed experience. And so for such a devout elder for 60 years to have a crisis of faith on his deathbed, it was really, really hard to take. And it's never discussed. Your deathbed experience is never discussed in the hall. You never go and say, we planned our funeral for such and such. You don't discuss things like that. You don't discuss 20 years down the road because, Armageddon's coming. So you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about your deathbed because, Armageddon's coming soon, around the corner. You never, ever put any thought into your deathbed experience. And every one of them are going to have one.
And then what about the warning against worldly people? I mean, members are taught that associating with non-Jehovah's Witnesses will corrupt their faith.
We have this wicked world all around us that is trying to assimilate us into joining them in ungodly conduct. And looking at the ratio, we as Jehovah's people are outnumbered by people of the world by about 900 to 1.
And then something as simple as losing a privilege. People got to conform to these rules or they risk their roles or privileges being revoked. Not being able to give a talk, maybe a brother being removed as a servant or an elder or whatever it is that's going to be humiliating you before the congregation, or isolating members by making them fear rejection.
The most painful thing I think you can do to another human being is to isolate them and cut them off. That's why solitary confinement, is such an issue in the prisons and stuff, and why it's such an effective tool also in those environments, because that people will do almost anything to just not be alone. And when you're raised as Jehovah's Witness your whole life, when all of your family around you, all your friends are in that environment, when they cut you off and disfellowship you, you are put into solitary confinement.
And then you can't forget the conditional love.
You come to the realization that the brotherhood that you thought you had as a Jehovah's Witness is conditional and relative. And I think that's an eye-opener for people too. And they recognize how quickly you can just turn that off because you no longer believe what I believe, or you no longer think the way I think. And then to be able to get the exposure to other people who are not like that, that's also very, very eye-opening. I will say that in the time that I've left Watchtower, I've made friendships, and I mean real friendships and connections with people who have been there for me in ways I can't even go into right now, in some really, really difficult times since leaving Watchtower, but who have been there unconditionally, unquestioningly. And it's not about what I think or what I do for them or what have you, but they've just been there. And more so than I ever encountered in all the years I was a Jehovah's Witness.
I mean, family members are conditioned to view love only if you are loyal to the organization. Leaving or questioning the group, you're going to risk losing all emotional and social connections to friends and family. And then, of course, the fear of being spiritually dead. You know, we're told that leaving the group means that we're spiritually dead. No hope of a resurrection or life after death.
What really affected my mental health stepping away was thinking about, is it really, if I step away, am I giving up not only some family, but am I giving up not being in the new system? Or if I die, am I giving up not being resurrected?
And then you're constantly reminded that if you leave the organization, this means that you're going to lose protection from God. And you're going to face an uncertain, dangerous world without divine guidance. And this is the reason why, you know, they want you at those meetings. They want you to be, you know, continually reading those Watchtowers, or now it's the JW broadcasting and things like that. And you got to get this constant diet of Watchtower rhetoric, because without it, there no conditioning could actually take place, you know. So it is very interesting to understand where you've been in this religion so that you can know where you're going. Thank you for taking this journey with me. In future episodes, I'll feature solutions, resources, and practical information to help you decondition from the influence of high control groups like the Watchtower. Stay tuned for more insights and tools to support your journey to freedom. All right, this has been Lady C. Please leave your comments below. I would love to hear your own fears about what you've gone through in this religion. And I'll see you on the next video.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Hidden Struggles with your host, Lady C. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to stay connected with us.